Welcome to this follow-on Leaders Get Real conversation with the best-selling author of Positive Intelligence, Shirzad Chamine, who stayed on after our live episode to chat further. Be sure to listen to the first episode with Shirzad where he sets the foundation for positive intelligence. And here, you'll find bonus content. We discuss a real-time story of a leader and their hyperachiever saboteur, diversity, equity, and inclusion, healthy conflict, and what are the 4 pillars of a high-performing culture? Good stuff. Enjoy. Shirzad, thinking about how positive intelligence impacts culture, share a little bit about what you see in terms of realities inside organizations and ways that you've seen positive intelligence make an impact on a culture.
Yeah, realities inside organizations is that these 2 camps of we gotta really invest in wellness of our people, and no, we can't afford that. We are in tough times. We gotta invest on performance. This chasm that exists is a very costly chasm within organizations, and what this framework enables us to do is stop having that false trade-off. And one example that I use is a lot of performance-oriented people are into sports, right? And so I use the example of, say you're in a basketball game and it's the last 10 seconds of the game and the ball is passed on to you. And if you make it, you're going to win the championship. And if you don't make it, you're going to be in trouble. So in that moment when the ball is passed on to you, it's really, really important what voices are in your head. If your saboteurs' voices are in your head, they're going to be saying things like, you better make this. If you don't make it, you're really going to be the laughing stock of this town. Oh my God, my career is ruined if I don't make it. All of those voices that are negative voices of the saboteurs are going to make it much more likely that you're going to fail, making the shot that you could easily have made during practice. Now, if you had high positive intelligence, if you had built the muscles that I'm talking about, quieting that anxiety-producing part of your brain and activating the positive part of your brain, you would be experiencing what athletes call being in the zone. What is being in the zone? When athletes are being in the zone, they absolutely perform at their highest possible level, and they're experiencing joy and complete presence and the complete absence of these voices. So the thing we are talking about is how can we get all of ourselves more and more into the zone, which is only made possible by building those muscles that will have us perform better and also feel better at the same time. And at any given moment, if I'm helping your wellness, I'm helping your performance. If I'm helping your performance, I'm helping your wellness. Because the way I'm doing it is by having you intercept your saboteurs and shift your stage. And that releases so much pent-up energy inside an organization that's being stuck in a false dichotomy currently.
That is so prevalent. And that tension is so real and so excellent, the way you put words to it. Now, when we think about the dynamics inside companies, one that comes to my mind is this we-they mentality that happens so easily. And I am coaching an executive in a tech company right now, and she has been very honest and discovered her own saboteurs and realizing that her hyperachiever causes her to behave in certain ways, that like she so wants to be successful, she so wants her team to be successful, that when it comes to cross-functional partnerships, she will end up not sharing information, sort of keeping things close to the vest for fear that like they're going to run away and take the credit on this, or they're going to end up doing things that keep our team from being able to achieve our goals. And so she's been really humble to recognize that in herself and trying to, do some PQ reps and withstand the temptation to keep holding that information and take some risks to share based on trusting that they will actually lead to better outcomes for everyone. And what I'm seeing is as she's doing that, she's seeing it's making a difference, that she had a reputation she wasn't even aware of. That she was someone trying to take the credit, and people were reticent to come to support her. So this we-they mentality that she's wanting to break down now that she's seeing it's actually created this chasm
Yeah.
between two business units and so on. What are your thoughts?
Yes, the hyperachiever is one saboteur with significant negative consequences. And what we talk about is it's very nice and awesome to be achievement oriented, but hyperachiever is a case in which I, as a hyperachiever, basically believe my self-worth and identity is all based on my achievements. And so because of that, if my identity is on the line, and if my self-worth is completely on the line, then as I have this target, the goal that I've set for myself, as I make my progress towards that target, anytime anything goes wrong, and often things go wrong along the way, I am going to freak out because my whole identity is on the line. Oh my God, if I fail, who am I? And so because of that, as I'm making progress towards the goal, I am all, anxious all the time. It is all about me and my achievement. So even within my own team, there is an I-them mentality because it's all about my achievement. So even my team believes that it's not about them achieving with me. It's about me making sure I achieve. So they feel objectified by me. They feel that they are a tool in my machinery to get me the achievement that I want. So interestingly, paradoxically, if I'm in the hyperachiever mode trying to achieve, it's less likely I'll achieve that outcome. One, because every time things don't go my way, I freak out too much, waste a lot more mental, emotional energy because my whole identity is on the line. Secondly, is because people around me don't feel inspired to want to co-create and co-achieve with you. You are more alone than you need to be in that achievement. So paradoxically, with the hyperachiever, you'll achieve less, not more. So what is the sage of all? You are not your achievements. You're not your achievements. You are a worthy, beautiful human being. Your sage is an absolutely beautiful being unconditionally. So just like we love our children unconditionally, how can you love yourself unconditionally? Not based on the achievement that you made, but based on just the beautiful being that you are. So we learn to go to unconditional self-acceptance and self-love, and buoyant by the beauty of that, we out of joy we say, and it will be fun to achieve this, let's go for this. So you set the achievement targets as a fun thing to go do, something that's exciting to you. Your identity is not on the line, and you have more fun at it. Enjoy every step more, include more people. When things go wrong, don't freak out quite as much, and even set your targets higher, because why not? You're not so terrified about failing, right? So you end up achieving more, setting higher goals, all of that stuff. Again, wellness, you'll experience wellness along the way, every step of the way, and also achieve higher. With hyperachiever, you're not going to enjoy every step. So most of your life is spent on the next achievement and very little joy of it. And you'll achieve less because of all the dynamics that I just talked about.
Yes. And what a picture. What you can just imagine the contrast between a leader who's creating that environment of the journey and the excitement and the motivation for the goal versus the environment where, like, I can't screw up, where they're so worried about the kind of consequences from a hyperachiever as their leader.
Yeah.
And so there is such a ripple effect in creating a whole tone. And which one of those leaders do we want to work for, right? We want to work for the one that you described, who's grounded in that way.
Yeah.
And that's what the muscle building does.
Suffer through with this leader for 3 months until that achievement is there, and then celebrate for 5 minutes and be told, and now this is the next thing. I mean, that's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Rather than that joy of going every step of the way together.
Exactly. And so in an environment with a lot of high achievers, a lot of rational, smart, intelligent people, it's natural that many of those will have those saboteurs and kind of go to the extremes under stress. And with, such constraints on resources, on cost cutting, on pressure, that it can trigger those saboteurs for people to ending up like dropping down into this negative spiral.
High achievers is awesome. Hyperachiever is not. Being rational is awesome. Being hyper rational is not. So all of these are taking a strength and converting into a weakness by overusing it in the wrong time at the wrong place, and it backfires. It gets you exactly the opposite outcome you want.
And it just affects everyone, and it causes other people to drop down into that self-protective, defensive spiral. And in that, you end up with a totally different culture and environment than the one that you're describing.
And we can't overemphasize the power of contagion. Because we have mirror neurons. Because of these mirror neurons, when we are in front of other people, we automatically, unconsciously begin to vibrate in the same part of our brain than the other person is. So especially if the other person is a leader, the members of that group are going to go to align their brain activation with that. So if a leader comes in and starts a meeting in the first 10, 15 seconds in judge mode of what's wrong with us, we should do better, let's perform better, all of that stuff, with that negative energy in the first 10, 15 seconds, that leader has sent everybody to their controller, avoider, stickler, victim, pleaser, whatever. And good luck now getting stuff done. Because and that saboteur contagion you have created ricochets back on you, so that you go to the next meeting even more hyped up in saboteur energy. What is it like to and we all know there are groups we walk into. I mean, even parties you walk into, when the energy is sage and positive, it brings different something in you, and you go to this stressful place, and all of a sudden you are feeling diminished, something, you're feeling anxious. All of us know the power of this. So the question is this culture bringing out the best or the worst in you based on, is it saboteur contagion or sage contagion?
Yeah.
And it makes a profound difference.
Indeed. Indeed. There's this gravitational pull,
Yeah.
When one person gets hijacked and they let that happen, it just causes a ripple effect where there's hijacking everywhere. People are triggered and defensive, and it changes the environment.
And in our company, we absolutely acknowledge that every single one of us is going to have bad days, is going to get hijacked, and that includes the CEO. And as CEO, I have said, hey, if I come into a meeting and I get hijacked, because God knows why, who cares why, and begin to have a saboteur contagion, save me from my own saboteurs and call for a 2-minute PQ break. And my promise to you is I will never say no to you. And I will always come thanking you because you have saved me from a deepening spiraling of my own saboteur. That's powerful. I can't tell you how grateful I feel that people have trusted me with that and said, can you please take a 2-minute break? Now, this is not looking at me and saying, shame on you, Shirzad, what's wrong with you? Around here, we're supposed to be sage. No, we're acknowledging that we all shall get hijacked. But how can we stop the contagion and catch it early? So we are grateful to each other when we do that. And it's not an act of, got you, I got you, you're in saboteur mode, what's wrong with you? It's an act of love. I care enough about you to save you from your own saboteur by calling an early break when you're beginning to go unconscious about what's happening with you. It's a mutual caring that we bring to each other out of respect.
Yes. And that is so powerful, because going through this muscle building for each of us individually, it's really the path of becoming our highest self. And I love just this honesty of the saboteurs. Like, they are real. We are all human, and we are all going to continue, no matter how much mental fitness we build.
Absolutely.
We're going to keep getting hijacked. We're going to keep getting triggered because we're human. And so to be able to say, hey, I'm on the journey of becoming my best self, but I'm going to keep falling prey to those saboteurs. So are you. So let's help each other become our best selves.
Yeah.
And ripple effect is, let's help our whole team become our best selves, and ultimately our whole organization become our best selves. And that is high performing.
High performing and high wellness. So we can constantly pair the two. Optimal performance and optimal wellness. The only way they can be maximized is together.
Let's talk a bit about so many different connections of positive intelligence with other really critical arenas. One of those is diversity, equity, inclusion, that I've been steeped in both researching and looking at the power of creating inclusive organizations, and see a lot of connections with PQ. Share some of those that you see.
Yeah, so I have worked with a bunch of organizations that are, with all sincerity, trying to bring more diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to the organization, and noticing that actually those very well-intentioned programs are backfiring. They are creating more divisions. They are creating more judgments. They are creating more tension, as sincerely as they were being implemented. And the reason, at the end of the day, is that inadvertently, a lot of these programs are actually perpetuating the saboteur reactions of all the people involved. So I can go down all the stakeholders in the organization and say, I can guarantee you that you have some level of saboteur orientation towards this whole topic. And as we get into the details of that, people realize, oh yeah, we are all bringing the saboteur orientation to this. And so basically, one of the pieces of work that we can do is look at all of the stakeholders and ask the question, in what way are you exhibiting negative emotions, stress, upset, disappointment, judgment, whatever, when it comes to this whole topic of that we're considering here, and letting people know that indeed there is a different way where we can have their sage take over. And one of the ways that we do that is that I think there's a polarization that happens when people are labeled as, and I've been in search of what would be a good universal labeling for these things, and there is no perfect answer. But the best I've come up with is advantage versus disadvantaged groups. So I use that terminology to take a little bit of the stigma out and say, there's a problem when some people inside an organization get labeled as the one who belong to disadvantaged group and everybody else is in the advantage group. If that's the only conversation that's happening, it's already polarizing. It's already polarizing. I am separate from you. And that's too often the conversation that's happening. And both members of both parties end up then having saboteur reactions. The conversation I like to have to bring a little bit more, sage orientation to this is, let's take this category of being advantage and being disadvantage and really go to the bigger picture of it and ask, and have every individual within that organization ask themselves, in what areas of my life do I actually belong to the advantage group? And in what areas of my life do I belong to the disadvantaged group? So to take myself as an example, I belong to the advantaged group as a male. I belong to an advantaged group in terms of my socioeconomic wealth and background and education. I belong to the advantaged group in terms of being, healthy right now. So those are a few. I belong to a disadvantaged group as I am aging. I belong to a disadvantaged group as I come from the Middle East, and so on. So I ask people, let's look at every element of your life and ask yourself, am I in the advantage group or am I in this advantage group? So as people go through this, we break down that you're only belonging to the disadvantaged group or advantage group, and have everybody to become more curious about, in which groups am I advantage? In which categories am I disadvantage? And most people belong to both. And then really bring awareness of, what are the saboteur traps for being in the advantage group, and what are the saboteur traps for being in a disadvantage group? For example, when you belong to the advantage group, one of the saboteur traps is feel entitled to whatever privilege you have in that advantage group, and not have any sensitivity to how much harder it might be for people in the other group. So bringing empathy and sensitivity to that is really, really helpful and important. What are some of the saboteur things we do in the disadvantaged group, whatever disadvantaged group is? One is that some of the hurt that we have experienced as part of being disadvantaged group can become internalized in the form of our saboteurs. For example, let's take racism. If I have grown up in a racist society, at some level, the judgments of racism have become internalized in the form of my own judge. So even if racism miraculously stopped in the world today, I will get out of bed still with my own judge tormenting me, with the messages of racism that, without knowing it, have become internalized to my own judge of myself. So when you belong in a disadvantaged group, work always is, in what ways have things been internalized in the form of my own saboteur, so that no matter what happens to the rest of the world, the torment will continue internally. And so there's always work that needs to be done for, I need to see how much of those messages have been internalized, and how I want to discredit my own judge and other saboteurs so that I can let go of some of what was generated. So these are just a couple of examples of how people in both groups can absolutely, come from saboteurs, and I see that all over the place. And ideally, I want everybody to get out of just belonging to one category and the polarization that comes from it, and see ourselves as belonging to multiple categories, so that we are having a broader conversation about what is it to be in advantage and disadvantage groups, what is it to be sensitive to the other, what is it to really hear each other out, all of that universal condition, rather than, oh my God, you're over here, I'm over here. I totally feel like I'm a different group of folks, and I got to walk on eggshells with each other because, oh my God, there's so much sensitivity to the very different groups that we belong to. And oh, by the way, the risk and sensitivity around these topics is such that a lot of people don't dare bring up these conversations, because God forbid if you actually step on one of these very sensitive landmines that can explode in your face. So I find a lot of organizations, a lot of people are walking on eggshells, are not really telling their truth. And instead, they are living with separation, distrust, resentment, all of that stuff that is happening in these kinds of conversations, without really leaning into there can be a better way of truly bringing equity, diversity, and inclusion, belonging.
Absolutely. And in organizations, there has been so much effort and money spent on diversity training and understanding bias, they're all important. But I have come to see that the true path of transformation is the one you've been describing, is if each of us can actually be on that journey of our own self-awareness and have the safety to actually start to uncover those saboteurs that are happening for each of us, all of us in that process. And in that, create the safety to stay in sage rather than getting hijacked, to be able to look to the sage power around empathy and exercising curiosity, that we can be humble about the things that we're still learning and actually really hear one another. And that's the path to create the true environment of inclusion and of equity and of justice, is as we can be on this journey, each of us ourselves, and then together join with each other on the same side rather than these opposing groups as you've described.
And part of the reason that is so critical is that sometimes the disadvantaged group I belong to is one that I cannot publicly share. For example, the most consequential disadvantaged group that I belong to was not the obvious ones, such as my ethnic minority. The most consequential disadvantaged group I belong to is that I was a traumatized child growing up. And it is something that I had too much shame to share. So if I am in a community that just looks at the visible disadvantaged groups and say, oh my God, these people in this visible disadvantaged group, if I am not careful, I am going to feel resentment towards this group that is being highlighted as a disadvantaged group. Then inadvertently, I'm going to have not compassion, empathy towards this group, but resentment towards this group. That's one way I can go to my saboteur. But ultimately, you want to create an environment where I want to have deep empathy for people in this group, absolutely feel their pain and say, oh my God, how can I help? And have it be an environment where somebody is at least acknowledging that a lot of other people may belong to disadvantaged groups that may even be invisible. And so the conversation needs to be elevated to one that brings unity rather than one that causes polarization. For me, the key message is the way we can, if we are not careful, these conversations become more divisive, and we need to raise to a level of conversation about the full humanity of how you each belong to the spectrum of advantage and disadvantage, and bring that sensitivity to all of our conversations. And that to me is every single person needing to ask themselves, what advantage group, what disadvantage group do I belong to? And in each of these groups, in what way has my approach been saboteur-oriented? Because I guarantee you in each of these classifications, people have saboteur-oriented responses. So in that sense, every single person needs to examine their own role within this very challenging conversation. I'm glad the conversations are happening, but we need to raise it to a different level.
Well said. Well, the last thing that I'll point you as a prompt is Let's talk about culture and the quest for many organizations, of course, to be a high-performing culture. You've shared some pillars. Do you want to share just some headlines about that? It's a rich area to explore, but even to just scratch the surface with what those pillars are for a truly high-performing organization.
Well, what we find that the place we want to start with organizations is each individual doing their own individual work, which is, how do I sabotage my performance and wellness? How do I intercept my saboteurs, go to SAGE, and shift my brain activation to the positive region? Once everybody in a team has been able to do that, then we can really step up and apply all these principles to being extraordinary teams together that optimize wellness and performance within the team environment. And what we find is that there are 4 pillars that really enable that. And some of them sound familiar from other works that you may have seen, but they bring all of this to under 4 different pillars. One of them is we call triple purpose. And triple purpose, we are familiar with from work of Sinek and others. That's about, make sure you ask the bigger why and look at the purpose and all that stuff. And what we find is that actually triple purpose is about 3 kinds of purpose. What we typically talk about is the third purpose, which is what's the impact that we are having on the outside world through our product, through our services, things like that. That's great. That's important to know. What's the value and purpose of the work that you do for people outside this group? But the first and second purpose are actually internal to the team. First and foremost, how do I do my work in this team and in this organization that will keep growing me in meaningful and significant ways? I'm spending most of the waking hours, of my life in this job right now. How do I make sure that this time is growing me in meaningful and significant ways? So that's my purpose number 1, actually. I want to keep growing. And in what way do I want to keep growing? I want to keep growing my SAGE, and I want to keep, weakening my saboteurs. That will have me become more and more self-actualized. So that's purpose number 1. Purpose number 2, how can I help my fellow team members towards the same thing? How can I help you, my dear team member, keep growing your SAGE and keep weakening your saboteurs? So I'm helping you self-actualize. So purpose 1 and 2 are basically one in which each team member is really committing to each other to help each other with continuous growth and self-actualization. And so we are being the change we want to see in the world. As we then have this kind of environment, and how do we, as a result, we're going to have bigger impact in changing lives or having an impact outside of this team. So that's why we call it triple purpose. And that's what fuels and brings real energy and motivation to our work together, and that's the continuous fuel of the team. The second pillar is what we call earned trust. And the reason we use earned trust is, as we know from Brené Brown's work, that vulnerability is an act of courage. And in particular, in our lingo, vulnerability is the SAGE act, because saboteurs don't want to be vulnerable. They want to be invulnerable. So we earn trust by being willing to be vulnerable. And what we mean by that, being willing to be authentic for who we truly are, showing up as who we truly are. When we acknowledge mistakes, fessing up to our mistakes. When we have saboteurs, being open about our saboteurs and wanting to work on our saboteurs. So we want to be vulnerable with each other. And that vulnerability is the way we earn trust. Without vulnerability, you do not build trust. And if we have been able to earn trust with each other through mutual vulnerability led by our SAGE, then we are able to have healthy conflict with each other, which is the third pillar. And what we mean by that is that, conflicts are unavoidable. And there are only 2 ways to handle conflict. Conflicts are unavoidable in a team, in any relationship. The saboteur approach to conflict will either avoid dealing with conflict or handle conflict in a way that damages relationship. The SAGE way of handling conflict is one that says healthy conflict is actually something that will force deeper listening, deeper empathy, deeper understanding, better problem resolution. Therefore, healthy conflict done through SAGE with all the SAGE powers of empathy and explore and innovate and so on, deepens trust that you have already built. So earned trust enables you to have healthy conflict. And every time you have healthy conflict, you actually deepen trust even further. So you've gotten yourself into a virtuous cycle. Now, as a result of being able to have healthy conflict, you can have the final pillar, which is mutual accountability. And what we mean by mutual accountability is most teams in the old-fashioned way are teams where every member of the team waits for the boss, waits for the team leader to hold everybody else accountable for their conduct and for their results. And that's a really ineffective way to do things, because that leader is often not around as interactions are happening between team members. What we want is team members holding each other mutually accountable for both conduct and results. And the job of the boss is made a lot easier because leadership is now co-owned by team members. Everybody in the team is elevated to a higher level of authority and accountability for making sure the results are coming and the conduct is coming as we intended. By conduct, meaning less saboteur behavior and more sage behavior. So as colleagues are holding each other accountable, the leader can now focus more externally on facilitating the information flow and changing the environment around us so that this team can succeed, rather than waste a lot of time internal to the team holding each person accountable. That team is being led more powerfully by every member of the team. So that's how a team becomes a true team, where the results are owned by everybody and the conduct is owned by everybody rather than just the team leader. With those four pillars, again, we are maximizing wellness and we are maximizing performance at the same time. And so what we do is initially, let's have everybody, get mentally fit on their own. And then when you bring it together, wow, there's a contagion effect where you really begin to see the incredible power of a shared framework like this when it's shared.
That is fantastic, the way you've laid it out. And I have seen the power of that when it's not just the leadership trying to create a certain result, but everybody is co-creating, everybody's aligned in those values. And so they'll do on both sides of it in terms of accountability. Number one, they'll give each other direct feedback, whereas in other companies, they just avoid it and back talk. And number two, they'll celebrate it, where they're actually like give recognition and give kudos to people in, their team, other teams who are living the values or who are doing, great contributions. And so it's this generative energy where the leader isn't so exhausted trying to monitor that and mediate and all of that, but people are co-creating and doing it for one another.
Absolutely. It is, when you think about conflict, there are some classical saboteurs in conflict. With the controller, the approach to conflict is win-lose. I win, you lose. With the pleaser, the approach to conflict is lose-win. I lose, I give you what you want, but I don't get what I want, you win. With the avoider, I just avoid dealing with the conflict altogether, which is lose-lose. I lose because I don't deal with the conflict. You lose because you don't deal with the conflict. The sage is a win-win, which is I lean into you. I tell you the truth. You tell me the truth. We go into deep explore mode, really listening to each other, deep empathize mode, putting ourselves in each other's shoes, understanding what the deeper needs and aspirations are underneath the positions we have taken, so that then we innovate, we come up with new ideas, with new positions that allows both of us to have the needs and aspirations we each had, and that becomes win-win. And as a result of that, we have gotten closer to each other. So healthy conflict actually deepens trust. Conflict is unavoidable. The question is, do you do it through saboteurs, which erodes relationships, or do you do it through the sage that enhances relationships through every conflict resolution?
And that is genuine diversity and inclusion, where everyone can actually truly engage among differences, among different points of views, among different values that they each hold, and to truly be able to come together in a healthy way of conflict about that. And boy, do we need that more than ever with how polarized we have gotten.
And we have, as when we talk about some of our sage powers of explore and innovate, we talk about in any conflict, the other party is at least 10% right. In any conflict, the other party is at least 10% right. And when we come at it in saboteur mode, I am 100% certain that I'm 100% right. And so I'm going to spend all of my time proving that, which means You're not going to agree with me, and we just keep going at each other like that. In Sage, I lean into what's the 10% truth on your end? What's the 10%? If there was just 10% truth on that side, what is that 10% truth? And as I lean in and get curious and empathic, you also then tend to reciprocate and saying, what's the 10% on this? And who cares if it's 10 or 10-90 or 80-20? Who cares? But there's a leaning in that allows the truth and the beauty of each position to come out, so that you co-create a new position that actually has the best of both sides. And if the world could behave like that, we would have many fewer wars.
Yes, indeed.
And so we want people to create environments of sage contagion in every place that they go, not just the work environment.
Fabulous. My goodness, such deep and powerful conversations. I love that idea of sage contagion. Yeah. That's the movement. That's the movement that we want to see happen. Sage contagion. And boy, will it change organizations and ultimately change the world. All right. Well, thank you, Shirzad, for just wonderful, wonderful, rich stuff.
I consider myself among kindred spirits following a similar path in life. So it's a real honor to be with you. I really appreciate you spreading the word. It has been very meaningful to me.
For me as well. Thank you, Shirzad.
Awesome. Awesome. Take good care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you'd like to see show notes and resources from today's show, or get alerts about new episodes, go to leadersgetreal.com. There, you'll also find many compelling interviews with top authors and authentic leaders. If you enjoyed today's interview, please share it with a friend or a colleague. You can find Leaders Get Real in video on YouTube and at your favorite podcast app. And to help spread the word, please follow and like on LinkedIn, Instagram, and iTunes. And be sure to comment. You may just win a book. Thanks for listening. And until next time, go forth and get real.